Hello, a very warm welcome to everyone who's joined this call today. Thank you for coming. The Scotland-Malawi Partnership has had a long-held aspiration to facilitate meaningful dialogue in the area of governance. And it's a great pleasure, therefore, that between this launch event today and May of next year, the partnership of the Malawi-Scotland Partnership and the Scotland-Malawi Partnership, MaSP and SMP, will co-host a series of 8 seminars which relate to chapters within the book Beyond Impunity, New Directions for Governance in Malawi, which is to be published later this year. The book itself was inspired by the momentous and unique events of 2019-2020 in Malawi, where for the first time in the history of sub-Saharan Africa, a flawed presidential election was invalidated by 5 brave Constitutional Court judges, and where the opposition then won the rerun poll. Beyond Impunity takes a comprehensive look at Malawi's multi-party democracy and governance since 1994. It's been heralded as a comprehensive, compelling and accessible account, bringing together critical insights on what's gone wrong while offering a sense of hope for a better future. We recognise that the Tonsi government has shown strong leadership in championing governance strengthening, and rightly received global acclaim for this. Indeed, His Excellency, the President of Malawi, specifically called for governance cooperation between Malawi and Scotland when he addressed our AGM last year. Nevertheless, it is important to recognise that the core of this series of webinars is a Malawian-led endeavour and entirely non-governmental in nature. Scotland only became involved after the book had been almost completed. The SNP's role has simply been to offer modest financial support and to engage people in meaningful two-way sharing. It's had no influence over either the content of the book or of these seminars. The MaSP and SMP operate as a respectful partnership. So it is fitting and a great privilege for Dr. Ann Phoya as chair of MaSP and for me as chair of SMP to jointly launch this seminar series and introduce the 3 co-editors of this amazing book, all academics who've been associated with the University of Malawi in Zomba. Future seminars, monthly, will hear from one or more of the 25 authors and take a different theme. Each webinar will have a Scottish respondent. And we're delighted this month to have Lord McConnell, who was instrumental in setting up the 2005 cooperation agreement between Scotland and Malawi. Now, before I hand over to my co-chair, Dr. Ann Phoya, to introduce our first 2 speakers, let me cover some of the essential administration points which are necessary in all Zoom meetings. First of all, as I'm talking, please feel free to introduce yourself in a single sentence. And don't be shy about sending a direct message to others on the call who might make useful connections with you. After the 4 speakers, there will be 30 to 40 minutes, depending on how accurate we are at timing, of open discussion, questions and reflections. Please put any questions and comments in the chat box at any stage. And if you're active, please also tweet through the discussion using hashtag #ScotlandMalawi and hashtag Malawi-Scotland. This meeting is being recorded as a video and it will go online soon, together with a record of the chat log and any copies of presentations that we received. And a link to the agenda will be put into the chat box by Craig. Now it's over to you, Anne, and I'm delighted to see you here. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof Cubie, for the welcome remarks. Let me just add that as Malawi-Scotland Partnership, indeed, we are very delighted to be part and parcel of this webinar, which is going to explore a critical issue of governance that is affecting a number of people, including everybody else in Malawi, if I have to say that. And it is also our belief that through these webinars, we will be able as a Malawi to look at the issues that probably affect or contribute to poor governance. And then we'll look at the solutions that all of us as citizens that have a hope for a better future can probably discuss candidly so that we are able to take ourselves forward and improve on our status. So probably before I take a lot of time, my duty this afternoon is to introduce two of our speakers. So let me go ahead and do right that. Probably just to say that let us all contribute critically to the discussion, because the aim is that we find solutions to the problems that are affecting all of us. My first speaker to introduce is Professor Kenneth, that all of us know through the circles of Malawi-Scotland Partnership and also through the Scotland-Malawi Partnership. Ken Ross is a professor of theology at Zomba College of Theology, where rightly I'm just next door to. He has served the area on as a professor of theology at Chancellor College, that is University of Malawi here in Zomba. And he has also worked as a chairperson for the Scotland, for the Malawi-Scotland Partnership before. And he has co-authored a number of books series. And the books include on governance and democratization, stock taking, that he co-audited together with Mr. Eking's Piri. And he has also published this series in the Kacheri series in 1988. He is currently authoring other series, and he edited the Edinburgh Companionship on Global Christianity that is being published by the University of Edinburgh Press. We are hoping that through his experience, he's going to share with us his experiences on governance, since as currently he's chairing as a chairperson of the World Council of Churches, and I think he has a wealth of experience on how in this big institution, he's ensuring that his institution is adhering to principles of governance. My second speaker to introduce this afternoon is Professor Asiyati Lorraine Chiweza, an associate professor in the Department of Political Science and Administration at Chancellor College here in Zomba, currently now University of Malawi, as the university has just changed its name. She holds a PhD in public administration from the Cotton University in Australia. She has authored several books, including journal articles, including the Journal of African and Asian Studies, Development Practice, as well as Public Administration and Development Alternatives. Her main research areas and interest, including expertise, are in local government, including governance development, gender and governance, public sector ethics and governance. So we think she's better suited to discuss this issue on issues of governance, so that we can learn from her experience and expertise for a better future for Malawi. Thank you. Professor Cubie, back to you.
Okay, I think with these introductions, it would be good to turn to Dr. Ken Ross, who is going to give the first talk. Ken, over to you.
No, thank you very much, Professor Cubie, and also to Dr. Phoya for the generous introduction. And I should start off by saying welcome to Zomba. And we noticed overnight that we had some very heavy rain. So I think we'll credit the rain to you and say you've brought blessing to Zomba when you came. And let me give my greetings also to all friends I can see both in Zomba and Scotland, around Malawi, and perhaps in other places also. So today, as we turn to this webinar and the book that lies behind it, there's really only one place we can start, and that is at Malawi's Constitutional Court on the 3rd of February last year, a momentous day in Malawi's history. I'm probably rehearsing a story that's familiar to many of us, but this is where we start. The leaders of opposition parties had challenged the result of the 2019 presidential election and had taken their case to court. So through the long weeks of the hot season in 2019, the case had been heard by the Constitutional Court, while at the same time, huge crowds took to the streets to demonstrate. And now finally, it was time for the judgment. The country came to a standstill as people spent the whole day listening on the radio to the court proceedings. Meticulously, the judges outlined the widespread, systematic, and grave irregularities that had characterized the election. And no one could have been surprised at the end of the day when they declared the result invalid, null, and void, and called for a fresh election. Nevertheless, it was an almost unbelievable moment. The ruling political elite had built up such a culture of impunity that it had seemed like they were beyond challenge. Now, they were dramatically called to account. The supremacy of the Constitution and the authority of the courts affirmed in a way that brought renewed hope for Malawi's democracy. Now, again, I suspect most of us who are in this room today are well aware of the subsequent events. On the 8th of May, 2020, the Supreme Court upheld the findings of the Constitutional Court. The fresh presidential election was duly held on 23 June 2020, and the result was a comfortable win for the opposition Tonse Alliance. The first time in the history of sub-Saharan Africa that a flawed presidential election was invalidated, with the opposition going on to win at the fresh poll. What is much less well known is that there was an academic response to these stirring events. Soon after the Constitutional Court judgment, a group of scholars convened at Chancellor College in Zomba with a sense that it was incumbent on the academic community to play its part in a defining moment for the nation. Some of those who gathered were veterans who remembered another turning point in the early 1990s and the role that was played then by academic analysis offered on a cross-disciplinary basis. In fact, a book published at that time, Democratization in Malawi, a Stocktaking, served as something of a model for the current effort, which builds on a substantial body of scholarship that has been developed in the following years. Initially, the idea was to run a series of seminars hosted by Chancellor College that could generate the material for a book. This was very quickly thwarted when the coronavirus pandemic arrived in March of 2020 and all schools in the country were closed. The group, however, was resilient and decided to push ahead nonetheless with the preparation of the book. Now, the book is complete and ready for publication. And this webinar provides an opportunity to fulfill the original idea of a seminar series, but in an enhanced way, using online modalities. and the wider network mobilized by the partnership between Malawi and Scotland. Meanwhile, the hunch of those few academics that something significant was brewing has been vindicated by international recognition. Malawi's Constitutional Court judges won the 2020 Chatham House Prize in recognition of their courage and independence in defense of democracy. The citation reads, "At a time when standards of democratic governance are under threat, not only in Africa, but in many democracies, Malawi's Constitutional Court judges set an example for their peers across the world by upholding the centrality of the rule of law and the separation of powers." The Economist magazine named Malawi as its country of the year for 2020. "Malawi is still poor," it commented, "but people are citizens, not subjects. For reviving democracy in an authoritarian region, it is our country of the year." Likewise, US-based Freedom House found that Malawi was the only country in the world where there was a positive trend in regard to freedom and democracy during the onset of the coronavirus pandemic in 2020. Such recognition can rightly be celebrated. The book, however, does not spend long basking in the glory. Rather, it takes the opportunity presented by this political turning point to offer a wide-ranging analysis of governance in Malawi. This reveals a number of deep-lying issues that have yet to be convincingly resolved. And with this, I will pass the baton to my distinguished co-editor, Professor Asiyati Chiweza.
Thank you very much, Professor Rose, for that introduction. I would like to start by saluting all the authors of this particular book, how they turned the COVID experience into an opportunity to do the first drafts for this particular book. Now, let me take you to the key issues that we highlighted on. But before I start, I would like to quote Maya Angelou, a famous American poet, who said, "I have great respect for the past. If you don't know where you come from, you don't know where you're going. I have respect for the past, but I'm a person of the moment. I am here, and I do my best to be completely centered at the place I'm at. And then I go forward to the next place." This reflects the kind of analysis that we did. And for us, the point is that the past is there for us to learn in order for us to do better today. So we did not do a snapshot analysis, but we took a historical and contemporary perspective to better understand Malawi's democratic governance more than 25 years after the end of one-party rule. So we look at how Malawi works or does not work as an effort to rethink Malawi's governance. So we argue through this book that the mass demonstrations held in 2019 to protest against the conduct and outcome of the presidential election, they do reflect widespread dissatisfaction among the population at large with the way in which Malawi has been governed. And we do argue that the demonstrations were driven not only by the flawed election, but also by deep concern about long-standing social, political, and economic problems that successful governments have failed to address successfully. So I'll take you some of the enduring issues of concern in Malawi's governance landscape that we do highlight. And I'm sure that you're very familiar with some of these issues because they've been raised in literature before. The first thing that we highlight is the dissonance between democracy as a system of governance and democratic performance. As a system of governance, democracy retains high approval ratings in the country. So if you look at all the Afrobarometer surveys, and I would like to quote the one that was done in 2017, they do show that 71% of Malawians support democracy. 84% reject presidential dictatorship, 69% reject one-party rule, and 86% reject military rule. Ironically, while democracy as a system of governance scores well, the same cannot be said about democratic performance. So there is a dissonance between the system and its performance, and in particular, the extent to which a democratic system is contributing to the improved living standards of the Malawians. The second aspect that has been enduring in our system is the existence of formal and informal rules. So you will notice that constitutional provisions and subsidiary legislation, they have established democratic institutions in the country. However, the functioning of the democratic institutions is erratic and not always consistent with their legal mandates. So you find that formal rules, no matter how stringently they are formulated, are often contravened in favor of personalized and irregular agendas. As a result, you find that Malawi's political governance has since then been characterized as fundamentally a hybrid neo-patrimonial state where a framework of formal law and administration exists, but the state is informally characterized by patronage networks. You also notice that Malawi has acceded to many major international and regional conventions on human rights. There are various examples, such as the International Convention on Civil and Political Rights, the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, the Covenant on the Rights of the Child, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, and many others. And as a signatory to these instruments, Malawi is legally obligated to abide by their precepts. And indeed, many of the obligations are enshrined in Malawi's constitution as the Bill of Rights, while others have been legislated and specified in acts of parliament. However, adherence to legal obligations has been challenging, and the performance with regard to different rights has also been uneven. In particular, we take note of women's rights and the issue of gender equality. The number 3 area that has also been enduring, that forms a background to this book, is the issue of political parties. Political parties in Malawi are partially committed to democratic principles in their internal affairs. That's why you usually find that when it comes to primary elections, there are many contestations. But also clientelism remains prevalent, and many political parties coalesce around ethnic identities or the personality of a key founding member who may also be a source of funding. There is an ever-widening divergence between campaign promises and the lack or slow delivery on such promises. So all the political parties, they make promises, and in most cases, they are beautiful promises. But when it comes to the fulfillment, you find that many of them do not clearly fulfill the promises. So once in power, they have perpetuated clientelistic behavior, forged settlements within the political elite, to the effect that those well connected to the political establishment have benefited at the expense of national development and the broader Malawian community. We also note that vested interests within elite circles swirl around and soak into the governance processes, since they always want to ensure that their interests are served. At the same time, ethnic cliques also affect the ability of the democratically elected representatives to use formal power to govern in Malawi for the benefit of the citizens. Another area that has also been enduring in our governance landscape in Malawi is the issue of civil society organizations. So you find that a multitude of civil society organizations play a prominent role in the governance realm, acting primarily to synchronize the government and as participants in the public debate. However, we note that sometimes they tend to act opportunistically when societal tension is running high, for example, around elections, but also when there are other key issues on the agenda. They are reputed to make some difference, but they also experience frustration when they are up against the powers that be. But we also note that there's also literature that talks about how some of them have actually been co-opted by the state. The other area that we do highlight as part of an enduring concern is the issue of corruption and the state of the economy. Corruption and abuse of office remains a persistent scourge in this country. Despite the professed commitment to curbing corruption by successful government since the democratic transition, this scourge remains endemic in Malawi. Efforts to deal with corruption have been piecemeal, and some of them have faltered. As a result, due to the dysfunctional corrupt governance system, the economy is stagnant and poverty is pervasive. So the Human Development Index highlights Malawi's dire economic situation. In 2020, for example, Malawi's value on the HDI was 0.483, which put the country in the low human development category at 174 out of 119 countries. You may also be aware that Malawi's economy is heavily indebted and it is also aid dependent. And over the few years, domestic debt has also been on the rise. The sixth area that I would like to highlight that has also been enduring is an issue of implementation of development plans and budget management. Although successful governments have made commendable attempts to set short to medium-term priorities in their development policies and plans, consistent implementation in accordance with those priorities has been lacking. And it's very common to hear that Malawi seems better at developing and setting priorities than implementing them. We do have a lot of beautiful documents that we have developed as a country, but implementation has been lacking. And in some cases, even monitoring and evaluating what we've been implementing in order to draw lessons has also not been quite consistent. So despite efforts to instill prudence in the management of public resources, budget discipline is often lax, and resources are diverted to purposes other than those intended. The seventh area that has also been enduring is the issue of the public service and public sector reforms. The Malawi public service has persistently experienced poor and declining performance in the delivery of services, as well as in the management of public agencies. There's also been a deterioration of work ethics, the issue of indiscipline, absenteeism, and proliferation of fraud and corruption. You find all these issues are widely acknowledged in many of the government documents. And indeed, given this background, Malawi has a long history of public sector reform, starting from 1964, when the country became independent. By 2018, there had been about 80 reform attempts by successful administrations since 1964, yet none appear to have produced the desired results. So, years after the launch of the Public Service Reform Commission report in 2014, the politicization of the public service remains deeply entrenched. So these are some of the areas that we do highlight that have been enduring, in this country as part of the historical analysis of the chapters that are in this book. I would now like to hand over to my colleague, the other editor, Professor Mulwafu, to take us through How then did we move from these enduring concerns to the chapters that are in this book? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Chiweza. Thank you to both of our speakers for such excellent scene setting. To Professor Ross for giving the background to the book and the seminar series, and to Professor Chiweza for her thought-provoking and very honest talk. We know that you, Professor Chiweza, will be chairing many of the future seminars, but now it's a great honor for me to turn to the third editor, eminent Professor Wapulumuka Mulwafu, who was Professor of Environmental History and Dean of Postgraduate Studies at Chancellor's College, but is now Deputy Vice Chancellor at Mzuzu University. Professor Mulwafu is the author of Conservation Song, A History of Peasant-State Relations and the Environment in Malawi, 1860 to 2000. He has also co-edited with John McCracken and King's Ferry, Malawi in Crisis, the 1959 to 60 Nyasaland State of Emergency and its Legacy. Furthermore, his chapter, which is number 13, in Beyond Impunity, is entitled Rights Without Responsibility, Governance Crisis in the Management of Natural Resources in Malawi. So it is particularly appropriate that we hear now from Professor Mulwafu about a different kind of governance, one that affects the whole planet in the week before COP26 here in Glasgow, where Malawi will play a key strategic role through chairing both the UN bloc of least developed countries and the South African Development Community. So, Professor Mulwafu, we look forward very much to hearing from you now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Heather, for that introduction. And ladies and gentlemen, what we have produced in this volume is a collection of different papers that look at a range of issues that we felt were significant for understanding governance in Malawi. And to that extent, we invited scholars to write papers to do with politics, economics, natural resources, but also to do with the issue of trust and elections. So the details, of course, will be obtained from the book once it's out, and also from the webinar presentations. But at this point, I just wanted to highlight the fact that in the course of editing the chapters, the number of issues that transcend the chapters. And for example, we do have chapters that deal with the issue of the process versus the outcome of the elections. That does it matter if the outcome of the election points to the fact that someone has won and we completely disregard the process? So I think that this is one of the issues that we took particular interest in trying to understand, so that in the process of developing or consolidating democracy and good governance, both the process and the outcome should be considered. And so there are also chapters that deal with the role of duty bearers, and that what exactly should the duty bearers do to promote good governance. In particular, the institution which was closely studied here is the Malawi Electoral Commission, and that the question of accountability to the citizens, that was also explored by one of the some of the chapters. And another issue has to do with the role of cooperating partners, and in particular the observers and to the elections, that what is their role. And we all know that after the 2019 elections, the observers declared the elections to be free and fair, but it turned out to be a completely different story in the end after the court had ruled against the election results. So this is also one of the issues that is considered in the book, and we feel that by interrogating some of these issues, we contribute to the discourse on broader governance debate in Malawi and in the region as well. And another issue which has been well covered by the chapters has to do with the tussle amongst the three arms of government. And I think Ken Ross also alluded to that the issue of the supremacy of the executive over the other arms of government. And that this is an issue which has also been considered by one of the, or some of the chapters in the book. And it helps us now to engage in an academic discourse so that we understand both the theory and practice that sometimes theoretically it can be well stated, but in reality this is not followed, and it can be sometimes disturbing to see that some arms of government actually are not following the constitution by making pronouncements that one arm is superior to the other. So these are some of the issues that have been covered in the different chapters. But now the issue before us is that what's the significance of this book to both Malawian society and to scholarship in general? What we note from the book is that the 1994 transition perhaps presents an unfinished agenda for the country, and that indeed there were a number of reforms that were introduced, but these were not completed. And that we've seen, for example, the forces, powerful forces of trying to abuse power, but also impunity, and these have continued to take place in the country. One can cite the third term bill attempt, I think, in the early years. But again, more recently, we've seen the issue of executive arrogance and also violation of the constitutional rights of the citizens. That all these are issues that demonstrate that we needed to have an academic discussion on some of these issues. So the second aspect regarding the significance of this book is that it shows the role of the military, that in the context of Malawi, the military has been very apolitical, and in fact, it has been an active facilitator in promoting democracy and good governance. This is unparalleled in Africa, where we see the military becoming actively involved and even suppressing the democratic rights of the citizens. So to that extent, I think we know what happened more recently in Sudan and in a number of West African countries, that constitutionalism is not always followed. But the other important aspect about the book is that of trying to demonstrate the tragedy of not establishing systems and institutions, particularly in political parties, that instead of consolidating the democratic culture and at the same time building institutions, we see, and this is coming out also in some of the papers, that some political parties have been promoting individuals and dynasties rather than allowing the citizens to elect freely their own leaders. And so the result has been, as I said, tragic for some of these political parties. And so this is one of the lessons I think that one can learn from this particular volume. And in addition to that, also, what we see is that the citizens in the country were ready for change. And there's been a spirit of resilience in Malawi that despite the efforts to try and quash any efforts by the citizens to fight for their own rights and democratic choices, but they've been resilient by enduring through the demonstrations and also using all sorts of channels to make sure that they achieve their goals. So I think this is important for Malawi, that citizens' rights cannot be ignored, especially where political leaders want to achieve their selfish political agendas. So now this volume, once it's published, I think it will add an important dimension to debates on governance and democracy in Malawi and beyond. And it's a book that is taking stock of what happened in the past, but also what happened in the recent years, particularly in 2019 and 2020. And therefore, to that extent, it has also tried to go beyond official narratives of what governance is and what democracy is, but it has used data collected at different points within Malawi. You remember our colleague Asiyati was citing some of the statistics in terms of the poverty levels, but also the issues of trust. So I think this is a volume that is been prepared by using accurate empirical data, so that its conclusions, therefore, are significant for positioning Malawi in terms of governance within Africa and indeed the entire world. So with that, I just wanted also to mention the fact that we believe that what we have done in this book is to set the ball rolling on governance, and we believe that future scholars will be able also to work on some of the issues that we may not have studied to their logical conclusion, but it's possible that we've simply opened the opportunities for further research and study. So thank you very much, and I hand over back to the chairperson.
Thank you, Professor Mulwafu, for this very interesting and important talk, for stressing the importance of understanding both process and outcome, and indeed the need to have good systems within democratic institutions, which have perhaps been lacking. But thank you too for highlighting the role of citizens on the one hand, and the unique apolitical role played by the military in recent events. And finally, for, as you finished by saying, the book was setting the ball rolling. And that's a great phrase for us to finish the talks from the three of you as editors of the book. But I would now like to turn to Lord Jack McConnell, a name that's known to probably most folk on this call. I'd ask Jack to reflect on Scotland's own journey of governance strengthening, based on his experiences in government, on the values of dignified partnerships, and the opportunities for strengthening democratic governance through different levels of society. Now, Baron McConnell of Glennscorodale was the first Minister of Scotland from 2001 to 2007, and he is a Labour life peer in the House of Lords. As First Minister, he implemented a ban on smoking in public places, very important to citizens. He signed the inaugural cooperation agreement with Malawi in 2005 and successfully bid for the 2014 Commonwealth Games to be hosted in Glasgow, showing a global citizenship approach. As a life peer, Lord McConnell's committed to continuing his work to further develop the relationship between Scotland and Malawi. The Scotland-Malawi partnership is underpinned by dignified two-way partnerships, where neither side looks to assume they know what is best for the other. Rather, this is about open, respectful, and humble two-way exchange of learning. And I hope that from what you've been hearing already, that this is exactly what today and this whole series of seminars is about. Now, just before I hand over, may I remind attendees to start putting your questions and comments in the chat box. There have been lots of introductions, but now we need a bit more substance. And we will be returning to these questions as soon as Lord McConnell has finished. Jack, Lord McConnell, it is a great pleasure now to have you as the first Scottish respondent in this important seminar series. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Heather, not just for chairing today's event, but for everything that you do for the Scotland-Malawi relationship. And thanks also to Dr. Phoya for her introductions at the beginning and for everything that she does in Malawi, with remarkable work in so many communities. And obviously a huge thanks to Professor Ross, Professor Chiweza and Professor Mulwafu. I feel as if I'm surrounded by professors today, a bit intimidated by that. So hopefully what I say can add to the discussion, even if it's not at the same academic level. Thanks also to everybody at the Scotland-Malawi Partnership and the Malawi-Scotland Partnership, for breathing life day by day into this remarkable relationship between our two countries. When we didn't so much establish, but reinvigorated the relationship between Scotland and Malawi back in 2005, all of us who were involved at the time were determined that this would be not only a people-to-people relationship rather than a government-to-government relationship, but also that it would be a relationship that was based on mutual respect and the mutual opportunity for learning. That this was not going to be a one-sided global north to global south relationship. This was going to be a genuine partnership. And SMP and MaSP work on that principle. And I hope that these webinars can embody that principle as well, because particularly given the challenges to democracy around the world, including in the developed world, maybe even particularly in the developed world today, then we need to learn from each other in how to strengthen both our democratic systems and the democratic performance, as it was described by Professor Chiweza. I think also, I would want to say just briefly, good luck to Malawi next week in Glasgow. Malawi's role is going to be so important at the Climate Change Summit next week, as was already said, both representing and speaking for the least developed countries, many of whom are most affected by climate change, but also in representing SADC as well. And doing so now with an enhanced voice and credibility and authority, given the events of 2019 and 2020, and Malawi's recognition for the quality and the strength of its democratic systems and the way in which they won over the difficulties of 2019-2020. So I look forward to that contribution next week. I'm going to be there in Glasgow and look forward to meeting the President again, and I'm sure he's looking forward to being in Scotland. He did encourage us, as David Hope Jones said at the beginning, he did encourage us in his address to the Scotland-Malawi Partnership annual conference last year to work together on governance. So this book comes out, this publication comes out at a very good time to take forward that discussion. And I just wanted to cover three things in responding to the really interesting comments that have already been made. First of all, in relation to Scotland's journey, sometimes I think it is forgotten that in Scotland we didn't just design, build, create a parliament by someone in a dark room somewhere drawing up some legislation, passing that through Parliament, and then the Parliament coming into being a year after. The proposals that became the Scottish Parliament in 1999 were debated, argued over for close on 30 years before that. There had been a referendum to decide on having a Scottish Parliament or not back in 1979. It was the first time I ever voted as a young 18-year-old, and at that time there was not enough support for the Parliament to see it come into being. And in the 2 decades that followed, there was robust argument about whether we needed a Scottish Parliament, what kind of powers it should have, what sort of structure it should have. And the Parliament that came into being in 1999 was a result of all of that debate, some of it in a constitutional convention that brought together elected representatives to try and agree a consensus way forward, but ultimately also engaging the public, and then in a referendum securing the public support for the creation of the new Parliament in Scotland. So democracy doesn't come quickly, and it doesn't come easily. It has to be fought for, and it has to be debated and argued about. And I hope this publication will contribute to the further development of democracy in Malawi on that basis. It's also not perfect. I think sometimes I get very, very irritated at international meetings, and sometimes here in the UK as well, when people in the developed democracies of the world criticise rather glibly the workings of democracy and its institutions and the rule of law across the developing world. There are many reasons, some understandable, some not acceptable for many of those problems. But the idea that democracy functions perfectly across the developed democracies of the world is complete nonsense. We have corruption, we have abuse of institutions, we have a lack of trust and faith in political leaders today. We even have in some places a questioning of democracy today. So we shouldn't underestimate the challenges of having successful democratic performance and democratic systems that people can trust and have faith in. And in the conversations that we have, we need, I think, to remember that. We tried very early on in the Scottish Parliament to do things differently. We had stronger rights for freedom of information than existed elsewhere in the UK at that time, or perhaps still today. We had a different way of structuring the Parliament that was meant to engage people more. We had a proportional electoral system that was meant to reflect public opinion more, and so on. But we still had difficulties implementing all of that and challenges, and we hope have learned from that. It's interesting that Professor Cubie mentions the smoking ban. I always describe the ban on smoking in public places in Scotland that was legislated in 2005 as the moment when the Parliament grew up. It was the first time that the Parliament really had passed legislation that could have provoked quite a bad public response. Passed legislation that was going to tell people what they could and could not do. Went against the grain, really, in terms of Scotland's recent history. But when the Parliament passed the Act, everybody in Scotland, even those who were really, really opposed to it, accepted the new legislation, obeyed it, and helped make it work. So it was a moment, really, when the legislative authority of the new Parliament was accepted by the population. And for that reason, perhaps even more than its health impact, I think that particular legislation will go down in history as a turning point for the authority of the Scottish Parliament and its powers under the new system that had been agreed the previous decade. There are still challenges in the Scottish system today. I think we made some mistakes early on. I don't think the style of the parliamentary committees works. I don't think it holds people to account enough. It's not probing, inquiring enough for a developed parliamentary democracy. I think there are problems in our proportional electoral system where people can be unpopular and lose, be held to account for things that they have done, but come back in through party lists and return to Parliament, even if they were being rejected in their constituencies. So I think there are issues there that need to be debated in Scotland. We need to refine and improve the system that we set up. But my main point is that it took time. And for that reason, my second point is that I want to really congratulate Malawi, really, for all the difficulties that we have heard described by the professors. I think if we look back at the last period, Malawi has come a long way since the end of colonial rule, through dictatorship, the periods of corruption at different levels, still, as has been said, a problem today, but sometimes it's been significantly worse than it is today. Through different democratic elections that have had their own challenges, the period of handover between President Mutharika and President Banda, had its own challenges, through to where we got to in 2019, 2020. And in that period, as has already been said, the role of the military in defending democracy and standing up for democracy has been different from many other parts of the world and other parts of the continent, and therefore is to be recognised and supported. But ultimately, Malawi's democracy is most challenged by the quality of life experienced by the people of Malawi. And the ultimate test of any democratic system, as has already been said, is what is it delivering for the people? Can people trust the system to deliver for them, not just to have an objective democratic outcome? And that, I think, is the biggest challenge facing the new president and his team moving forward. Can this strong resolve of democracy in Malawi, can it actually produce a government that can turn round the lives of people in Malawi? Can all that support there is across Malawi for democracy, for a free and independent media, for a strong civil society voice, and for change at elections, if that's what the people want, can that actually ultimately deliver change in the economy, change in society, and so on? And I wish him well on that challenge, and I wish everybody involved well on that challenge. But I think that will ultimately be the biggest test of this democratic outcome. And the final thing I wanted to say is that I think we have one of the reasons I think we have a lot to learn from each other in this debate is that all around the world there is, I think, now a really strong debate taking place about whether or not parliamentary democracy, as we have known it, is in fact a system that can retain public support. We see in the strengthening of autocratic regimes around the world today, and their export of their system of government, their promotion of their system of government as being better than democracy. We see a real threat, I think, to the systems of democracy, parliamentary democracy, that we have treasured for a century or more. And in that, I think there are real challenges. I don't think that political parties in the developed democracies have adjusted well to the change over the past 50 years from a political system and political debate that were centered around class to one that is now more engaged with identity. I think the established political forces have struggled to deal with that change. And that itself has produced a challenge to institutions and to democratic debate and accountability. So I think as we move forward in the challenging world of social media, of global issues that require global action, not just national action, climate change, even in these days, poverty, and so on. How do we reinvigorate our democratic systems, justify them to new generations, and make sure that we all learn something from each other in that process. And I hope that this publication, this series of webinars, can help us down that road.
Thank you, Jack, for these interesting insights from the Scottish situation, whether it's the 30 years that it took to establish the Scottish Parliament or the time for legislative authority to be properly recognised by the population. But also that other dimension, which hopefully will lead to some questions, the fact that there are real challenges in any democracy, and whether what we've understood for many years as parliamentary democracy can continue, how we can learn from each other to reinvigorate it. I hope we get some suggestions coming now. Thank you very much. Thank you to all our speakers. And now it's time for an open discussion. We are running a bit late and have perhaps a little under 30 minutes for some open discussion, questions and answers, reflections. I'm just about to turn to the chat box to see what is there. So there's the one here from Mary Popple saying, what can we learn from Malawi's journey? Oops, let's and the research that's gone into the book to help ensure democratic processes filter right through society and then stick. Would anyone like to pick that up from our speakers? Perhaps, Jack, it really follows on from exactly what you've been saying.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say something very briefly that maybe then spark off comments from those who have been writing about this in more detail. I think the number one thing that comes out of the democratic journey, recent democratic journey of Malawi, is the vital importance of independent institutions and a separation between the judiciary and politicians, and the need for a strong democratic rule of law. And this is, if you look around the world today, the places that have got the worst problems and the worst abuses of rights are the places where this separation is least clear. And you know, I think the reason that Malawi pulled through this situation is because it had that. Yes, reinforced by the military over the years, but I think that core of the Malawian system of government is something that the whole world can learn from. The developing world can learn because in many places it doesn't exist. The developed world can learn from it because in many places it's under threat.
Thank you. Would any of our other speakers like to comment?
Heather, if I could come in, I think I might be striking a similar note in a different way, but to me, a big lesson from the Malawi story is the power of constitutionalism. And this has a long history because when the British administration came into Malawi in the 1890s, they used a lot of violence to impose the colonial regime. And the Blantyre missionaries at that time were the prime critics of the administration. And the point they were making is that this is a constitutional people in Malawi. It's going to be counterproductive to use violence, use constitutional methods. And I think here we are, what is it, 130 years later, and I think the people of Malawi showed their values of constitutionalism, because when there was a great deal of dissatisfaction, 2019, they didn't attempt to have a coup or some violent method of doing things. They took the case to the court and patiently followed the legal procedures. And when people went on the streets, it was very largely peaceful protest to make the point. So I think that is one of the great strengths that Malawi brings to many challenges. But of course, the UK doesn't have a constitution. So maybe that's something it has to think about for meeting its challenges.
Yes, thank you for that. And yes, that lack of a constitution is an important difference. In fact, one of the questions that I had was, do you think Scotland could ever produce a book like this? Because it is so honest and been willing to assess where there are failures, successes, and where lessons can be learned. And I'm not sure we could do it.
Is that a question to me?
Well, it is a comment. It's my own kind of feeling.
Well, I think we
yes.
have I do think we have a particular problem at the moment. Yes, I think as everybody on the call will be aware, Scotland is currently a divided country in terms of its constitutional status in relation to the rest of the UK. Views on that are very polarised on both sides of the argument. And if anybody questions an element of the current system of government, then they tend to be, that tends to be seen in the context of that polarisation of views, rather than rather than from an independent constitutional or democratic reflection. So if somebody criticises the current system of government in Westminster and the way that it operates, not so much the individual decisions of politicians, but the way in which the democracy operates at Westminster, then those who don't want Scotland to be an independent country tend to get very defensive because they feel that the United Kingdom is in some way being criticised. And similarly, on the other way around, if you criticise, as I did last year and I did again today, if you criticise the way 20 years on the Scottish Parliament perhaps could be strengthened, in its democratic functioning, you tend to be, it tends to provoke a defensive reaction from those who want the Scottish Parliament to be fully independent. So I think the polarisation of debate in Scotland does not help us at the moment reflect on how to strengthen and improve our democracy at local, national, or UK level, and that is a problem.
Thank you for that, and perhaps that's a debating point in Scotland too. But let's turn back to some of the questions that are in the chat box. One is a practical one. Can extra information be given about when the book is being published and who it's publishing? Now, I think I can pass over to our editors to really answer this. It follows on by asking, this is from Ken Lepengo, is there a location at which you can pre-order? And actually, even if it's going to take a little while, is it possible to see at least a table of the contents? So over to the editors to pick up those very practical questions.
Okay, Heather. Well, let me kick off. Maybe the others will want to add things. Yeah, I was just looking yesterday at a proof of a new book announcement from the University of Cape Town Press, which is going to be the international publisher of the book. So I think that will be going live soon, although it's going to be a little while before the book comes out. But we'll also have, through Mzuni Press, we'll have print copies. The Cape Town one will be open access publishing, but the print copies in Malawi with generous funding from the Scotland-Malawi partnership, and we'll be getting them available as soon as we can. I know when you're the author or the editor, you always want it to be out tomorrow, but publishing is always slower than you like. But if I give a cautious estimate, I'll say we'll definitely have it available before we finish the webinars.
Thank you. Thanks. So hopefully that helps those who are very anxious to see it, and can't wait the 8 months for all the seminars to have taken place. But there's also.
The thing I should add, Heather. Sorry, I should add. I think we could certainly post the table of contents either through the website or maybe in the chat next time we have the webinar. That could definitely be made available anytime.
Thank you for that. That's great. There's another very relevant question, perhaps for Professor Chiweza. Are there any plans to engage the political stakeholders?
Thank you very much for that question. Currently, I think we are in the process of trying, to work out processes of getting the book published. We do not have like concrete plans to engage particular stakeholders, but we are making the book available to a variety of stakeholders, such as government actors, academics. It's also a useful book for students, political parties, policymakers, as well as the citizens in general. But let me also move on to address one of the questions I think that I've seen in the chat. To what extent do the contributors and editors see this as a forward-looking publication? How do you hope people to take and use it? I mentioned at the beginning that the kind of interrogation that we have done is to go back and look what is happening. And our cutoff point, if you notice, was 2020. So this book sets a platform for better reflection, even of what is happening now, a better reflection for policymakers, for government, for political parties, citizens in general, and it provides significant lessons in terms of how do we move forward? What would be the best way? So we've kind of packaged, the issues that are key. And so even CSOs and NGOs can take this and look at what are the areas that need strengthening? What are the key areas that we need to work on? Where should we give, priority? So it is an opportunity that has packaged, a variety of issues that we as a country can touch on and also deliberately, decide to strengthen. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. There's another question which, and in fact, they're coming in thick and fast now. This is a very specific one. How does the Malawian governance struggle draw from the traditional governance systems from the village group headmen and TAs? Are there any good practices from pre-colonial governance systems that can be applied? This is from Hulata Lusungu. Maybe that's another one for either Professor Chiweza or Professor Mulwafu.
I think that Asiyati Chiweza is a better place to answer that one.
Asiyati?
Yeah, thank you very much. Yes, in this book, unfortunately, we did not deal so much with the local governance systems. That actually would have been a part of the work that we're doing. But that chapter eventually did not succeed in the process. So we are not necessarily looking at the local governance in this book. Okay,
but it may be something for the future. I see that there's a little bit of the chat is carrying on with that. Another one from Kingsley Lupandi. How do you hope the insights in this book will trickle down to the general citizenry, as you are the key players in ensuring the standing of a democracy? Any of our speakers? our editors.
Okay, I can try to respond to that one. Obviously, as an academic publication, the readership is limited, but we do hope that people find it interesting to read, even those that are not part of the academia. And in fact, it's the way it's been presented is such that anyone, whether politician or a member of the general public, can read and find it very useful. But it is our expectation that even the media and other interest groups probably will find it helpful in terms of publicizing, writing articles based on what is covered in the book. And we might also consider in the end, in the future, organizing some launch ceremonies in the country so that people will be able to understand better what the book is all about. Thank you.
Thank you. And now, as I said earlier, the chat log will be retained and will be available. So you will be able to see all that has come in, whether I managed to cover everything that's requested or not. There was one question from Eve Broadus of the Fair Trade Scotland, which asks if there is a strategy to ensure human rights due diligence in the supply chain. That's a very specific question. I wonder whether anyone can answer that. Eve has then expanded that in saying, if you're looking at sustainable economic development to bring a country out of aid dependency, then there needs to be a do no harm clause in any governance structure. Yes, I think that is true in everything. But do you want to, very briefly, Eve, add anything to that? You're muted.
Yeah. Sorry, yeah, not really. It's just that I feel, you know, if we're looking at trade and we're looking at sustainable economic development, obviously it's got to come from the government. So there's got to be a governance structure that, you know, brings that in. Surely, I mean, I just feel that, you know, Scotland's a fair trade nation. We've got, where is the economy? Where is that in a governance structure? If you're going to bring it out of poverty, if you're going to bring it out aid dependent, there needs to be governance, surely. I don't know. Perhaps
yeah, there does need to be governance. Yes.
I mean, and is that being addressed? Is that being looked at? I don't know. Perhaps Jack could answer.
Perhaps we should leave people to think about that one in specific settings. Let me turn back to what's in the chat box again. And there is one from a councillor, Gertrude Chirambo, in the Namalimi Inwe ward in Blantyre, who's asking how there can be systems, or where are the people who can ensure implementation of governance standards. Well, that's a very big ask, isn't it? But where are the major gaps that derail the meaningful change? And I guess that's some of what is being covered both today and in the chapters ahead. But perhaps would anyone from our speakers like to expand on that area?
I think one simple thing I could say on this, Heather, is when we started, we didn't know what the title of the book would be, or even if there would be any kind of unifying theme. But it was only as different authors did their work and we were doing the editing of the chapters, we saw that a thread that holds it all together is the question of impunity. And hence the title came to be Beyond Impunity. And I think this is the kind of aspiration that's reflected in the question. that there has been too much impunity in Malawi, that people who've got into powerful positions have been able to act with impunity and not expect that there'll be any kind of accountability. But for a flourishing democracy, accountability is crucial. So we hope it'll be one of the major contributions of the book, in fact, is to envisage a Malawi that moves beyond impunity, precisely by having the kind of accountability mechanisms and a balance between different arms of government that will make the situation much better in future.
Thank you, Ken. Actually, there's a very interesting comment from Shora Kaluka, who says that actually perhaps citizens too need to react beyond impunity, when she says that citizens contribute to political campaign lies by laughing at honest politicians who sell very few points of delivery. And that perhaps is true. Everyone has a responsibility, whether you are on the within the political democracy or just in your capacity as part of civil society. So we've got another one, a question down here. I'm running down through the list from Joyce Jumafiri, who is part of the Malawian diaspora in Scotland. And Joyce is asking, where does the role of the diaspora sit in the governance arena? That's a little harder perhaps, but would anyone like to pick that one up?
A very brief answer to it, Heather, would be that we don't have any specific coverage of the diaspora. I have to be very honest and say that. But we do have some contributors to the volume from the Malawi diaspora. So, of course, in one way, when you belong to Malawi, but you move away into a different context, you get a certain perspective that is really valuable. So when the book comes out, I think you won't see the diaspora specifically covered, but you will see contributors from the diaspora.
And of course, you're part of the diaspora of Scotland in Malawi. And I think it's important that we remember that too in our two-way interactions. I think we've reached the end of the questions that are in the chat box. Could anyone, I'll very quickly look at the gallery to check if there are any hands up. Does anyone have any burning question to ask? David, I see you've got your hand up.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much, Heather. A question maybe to our two Malawian speakers, Professor Chiweza and Professor Mulwafu. Firstly, thanks for your absolutely brilliant talks. And each of the speakers have raised various sort of successes and various challenges in each of our respective countries. And I suppose I'd be really interested to hear from you guys as we draw to a close, if there was one particular thing, quite a tangible thing in terms of governance strengthening that you would like to see in Malawi, perhaps 5 or 10 years from now, just one tangible thing each that you would like to see. I'd be really interested to hear it. I know it's probably the sort of question best to ask at the end of the webinar series rather than the first, but I thought it might be a good way of ending this Q&A session.
Brilliant, David, thank you. Let me ask each of the 3 editors to respond as quickly as they can to that.
Yeah, I have my hand up. I don't know if you can see me.
Sorry. Please carry on speaking, Asiyati. Yep.
All right. Yeah, thank you very much. Actually, I wanted to go back to this. I had seen this question, which is being raised by David. I think for me, when you look at all that we have written in this book, I think the key issue that we are raising is our democracy and system of governance. To what extent can it deliver, can it deliver on improving the livelihoods of Malawians? And I think for me, a key area that needs attention in terms of strengthening has to do with the budget management, the whole area of finance management, but also, the whole area of implementation of priorities and promises. So if the whole governance system can work around these issues, because obviously at the end of the day, every Malawian wants to see that democracy is delivering and is delivering to the needs of the Malawian public. Thank you.
Thank you. And Professor Mulwafu?
Well, thank you very much. I think for me, the key issue is that of strengthening the institutions and systems. Whatever we're talking about, impunity, the challenges that the country has been experiencing, most of them hinge on the abuse of the existing institutions or lack of institutions. So if we can really strengthen the institutions, then I think that people will be more or less compelled to follow. And I think if you also look at what happened in terms of the judgment last year, it's simply because we had an institution that really tried to live by its principles and not being cowed by politicians. So thank you very much.
I think that's very valuable, that we do often feel cowed by the political setting. And that's perhaps a good point to close the discussion on. And I will just, we've made up time, which is brilliant. And let me just actually finish with a few concluding remarks. I think it has been an enormous benefit, dare I say benefit, from COVID, that it has been possible to write a book, to turn to writing instead of speaking immediately. Planning a series of public lectures first, but the constraints of COVID allowing the book to be written. And the wider audience possible because of that is surely a great outcome. As has been said a few times, Beyond Impunity is a book written by academics independent of government, and maintaining that academic freedom, which is so important in both Malawi and Scotland as we move forward in challenging times. Yet it does address the ambition of the government of Malawi to strengthen governance at every level. Professor Chiweza has said their central theme was to write showing respect for the past, and through it, to learn to do better today. Professor Mulwafu stressed the importance of understanding process and outcomes through all areas of governance. These are significant lessons, not just for Malawi, but actually for all countries and all citizens in those countries. And turning to the citizens, the impact of civil society in Malawi in helping to bring about fundamental change as a consequence of the momentous events of 2019-2020 can't be underestimated. And in true partnership, this exciting seminar series and the book publication has been made possible by funding from Scottish civil society through the Scotland-Malawi partnership. No funding comes from government. And I think that is important as we begin to see how we interact together as individuals. So I think this has been a really exciting afternoon. And my thanks are due firstly to our 4 excellent speakers for their insights and individual perspectives. They give us much food for thought, not only in how their diligent and thorough writing will influence the future, but in how Scotland should also react to such honest, open and critical appraisals of the institutions and activity in Malawi. How would we fare in a comparative assessment? Secondly, I'd like to thank the themes at SMP and MaSP for their cooperation and mutual support. I'd like to thank Craig and Jade for their wizardry with technical complexities and the wonders of communication. And we've had no breakdowns in it today at all, or loss of internet. That's amazing. And I'd especially like to thank David Hope Jones for his untiring diligence in ensuring that this whole series is a success both in Scotland and Malawi. Finally, I know I can commend the other 7 seminars to you. And I'd like to finish with a very positive comment written by the Malawian historian Paul Chiweza in the foreword to Beyond Impunity, which it says the book exudes a sense of hope that the struggles for a better future will continue. Thank you all, Ken, Azewa, Wapu and Jack, for all your contributions, and to everyone who has participated in this seminar. Thank you.